Hi, everyone. This is Marceline, and I have a pleasure of having a conversation with Mantate Mlotshwa from Zimbabwe. She is a producer and co-host at Resistance Bureau, which is a global network for discussion on democracy and freedom for the new generation of leaders in Africa. She is also the program leader at Magamba Network, Zimbabwe's leading creative organization for arts, digital media, activism, and innovation. She is also founder and CEO of UMotle. Is that how you say it? UMotle?
Yes,
Motle.
UMotle.
Okay, UMotle, which is a South African-based online store for African-inspired accessories. Mandate, thank you very much for responding to the call.
No, thank you so much for having me. It's a
Yes.
pleasure.
All right. So my first question is, and I have been following you on social media for a while, and I always ask myself, how does she end up doing so much at such a young age?
Well, I also have that question too. Like, I'm always asking myself, like, how do I manage to fit everything within 24 hours of each day? But I think for me, from a very young age, I've always been outspoken. I have always had an opinion from a very young age. And I was raised by my grandmother, and she never told me not to speak up. So when I gave an opinion, she allowed me to. When I said no to certain things, when I asked questions, she allowed me to. And I think that kind of cemented my foundation in terms of whatever it is that I do right now. Because I grew up in a space where I was consistently told, oh, Mugabe speaks like this, you take after this man. And you're just so young and blank, I mean, you're trying to find yourself. I grew up in a space where I was always told, you're going to be president one day, you're going to be the African Union one day. These are things that were spoken to me at a young age, and I owned that. So going through high school, it starts from primary school when you're class monitor, prefect, deputy head girl in high school. I was in junior parliament when I was in school. So naturally, it's like every part of my journey was cementing who I am right now, who I'm becoming. So when I stepped out of high school, one of the things that I did was I involved myself in a lot of NGO work. So I volunteered for a long time. I think it was 2016, 2017. I was almost like a full-time volunteer type thing. And it grew me. Sometimes we look at those things and think, oh, you're doing free service type thing and you're not getting money out of it. But I think for me, it helped me to establish myself, my network, to build a brand, to build a young woman who was hardworking without the money, And later on, when I got into the professional world, I remember my first official employment was 2018 January with an organization called the Women's Institute for Leadership Development. And I started there as a program associate. And this is a child that literally stepped out of high school, spent 2 years volunteering, finding herself and things like that. But you're getting a job, you don't have a degree. You know how these jobs want you to have certain things? I jumped into the space and I was good at what I was doing because I had the experience. I had the track record of things I was doing outside of formal employment. So I worked in this organization for like 8 months. Then, God willing, got another job, which was like a job in Harare. So I moved from my original city in Bulawayo to the capital city. And I was working for an international organization called the International Republican Institute as a senior program associate. So again, you're in that space where you are good at what you're doing, but you don't have this degree. Like everyone assumes that you need certain papers to make it. I mean, it's a prerequisite in a lot of places, but for me, it's just that track record. I always make sure that whatever it is that I do, I tell the story of what I'm doing, the impact it's having, the potential it has to do bigger. So beyond the 11 months, I worked at the organization for like a year, 11 months. And then I applied for this current job that I have, which is an amazing job within a media organization. And I got that job again. So for me, the journey has been, how do you work before you even get an incentive for your work? And Zim, it's pretty difficult. A lot of people don't have jobs. I count myself privileged to actually be working. I'm in my final year of university, but I already have so much, work experience within this space. So I think that's where it was coming from. And then there's other things that you mentioned. You mentioned the Resistance Bureau. Last year in July, I got communication from a colleague of mine, Nicholas Chisman, who's the founder of Democracy in Africa and also a professor at Birmingham University. And he was saying that there's a project that a couple of friends were putting together that's focusing on democracy, human rights, and the struggle for freedom in Africa. Do you want to be a part of it? And me being Mantate, loving things and loving the continent, I was like, yeah, totally. I remember when I jumped in, I was very nervous because you're coming into a space where you're curating shows that center around politics, human rights issues across the continent. You've got to know what's happening. You can't host Bobby Wine and not understand the political dynamics in Uganda. You can't speak to Tundu Lissu from Tanzania without understanding the dynamics within Tanzania. So it kind of forced me to have an interest in the democracy, human rights issues within the continent. It was such a great experience for me because it taught me to learn. I would get into the spaces, you're interacting with big names, people that you never ever thought you would actually have a conversation with, but you're actually teaching those people, they're learning from you, you're also learning from them. And the kind of network it's then allowing me to actually interact with means that I'm getting more opportunities outside even Zimbabwe. So that's me, basically, wherever I am, I'm about building the network, because those networks are the people that then create opportunities for you. Or when they've got something going on, they actually think of that young girl from Zimbabwe and say, oh, we've got a project going on. Do you want to be a part of it? And that's how I actually grew into the Resistance Bureau. And then the last thing was UMotle, which is my recent baby. The reason why I started UMotle for me is because I love fashion. Like, I love African inspired fashion. So for me, the question was, how do I use fashion to curate stories of African women? So the premise of the brand really was telling the stories of African women, shaping the narrative about women in Africa. So that's what I'm doing. I'm doing something that I love, dressing other women. But at the end of the day, I'm telling the stories of those women. So I guess, yeah, that's just me. That's been my journey.
At the end of the conversation, I was going to ask you to give some advice or some tips or some things that you've learned, but it looks like you just said all of it right now. Because one thing that you really said is that I really liked is being always active, being about doing something. And it doesn't matter if you're getting paid for it, just go and do something. Somebody's going to notice you. Do the best that you can do. Even if nobody notices you, you are still building this experience in you. You are building self-confidence. You are learning new things. And sooner or later, a year or two from now, then something opens up, because somebody says opportunities and blessings, they open for people who are ready. Right?
True.
Right. So,
that's true.
Really nice. And another thing that I like that you say is about learning. It's like you are a continuous learner, and you are not defined by the degree that you have or that you don't have. You are always about action. You are always about achieving something, growing networks. I really like those things that you say.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's excellent. So you have just said that you have been speaking and interacting with leaders, especially at the Resistance Bureau. I have been following some of the discussions, some of the talks that you have been having over there. It's really inspiring. So can you talk a little bit more about the things that you are learning as you do your work with the Resistance Bureau?
Yeah, I think for me, the first lesson potentially is that we are all fighting for an Africa that works for all of us. I think that's the greater lesson in all of this, because you're interacting with politicians, you're interacting with civil society leaders, you're interacting with journalists, the academia, you're interacting with different people. And you're realizing that in their different ways, they're contributing to the kind of Africa that we want to see. So one of the things I've been seeing a lot, I remember we had an episode that was called The Art of Resistance. And it was looking at the role of the arts, in driving resistance within the continent. And you look at, women in South Africa. We had an actress from South Africa called Lebo Mashile. And this is an actress, this is a poet. And when she's sharing her story, you begin to understand that this is someone that understands that I'm a poet, I'm an actress, but I can help to shape an Africa that politically makes sense, that economically makes sense for the broader African community. And then you also look at people like Pilato in Zambia, people that are musicians. You look at people that do cartoons, satire in different countries, and you're realizing that I don't have to be a politician to feed into the Africa that we want. And for me, that's been like the biggest challenge that I've given myself, to say, I want young people to identify themselves, to say, I'm a poet, that's my gift. I'm a dancer, I'm a musician, I'm a painter, I'm a doctor, I'm a scientist, I'm this. Like, I want young people to all know that it doesn't matter what you do or what you're good at, you can still contribute. Because I think we've been made to think that politics or this change that we want to see is something that politicians, people that can speak, can actually help to drive. But the lesson I've been getting in a lot of the spaces that we're in is that it doesn't really matter what you're doing. We all have a responsibility to build an Africa that works for us. And then the other lesson as well has been around the role of Africans that are outside the continent. A lot of people have been forced out of the continent because of certain reasons. Zimbabwe, being an example, we've got a lot of Zimbabweans in South Africa. We've got a lot of Zimbabweans in the UK, in USA, wherever. It's like a lot of our people are leaving the country, trying to secure livelihoods for their families. A lot of them are trying to find jobs that can dignify them, because within this country, it's a mess. So you find that the biggest challenge comes from a place where Zimbabweans in country might feel that the Zimbabweans outside don't understand the struggle. So there's this, detach, this anger towards those that left, because they feel like these guys kind of threw in the towel and left everybody here. But there's also a diaspora community that feels like Zimbabweans in country are not fighting hard enough, like they're angry at us for not fighting ZANU-PF enough or fighting the government enough type thing. So one of the things that I've been seeing through our interaction, because our shows bring together people within the continent as well as Africans outside the continent. So just being able to see these two people interact, for me, that's kind of one of the best things about the show, and the lessons that I've drawn, to say, it doesn't matter that I'm within the country. It also means that somebody outside has a voice, can actually contribute to the narrative we're driving around, the Zimbabwe we want, the Zimbabwe we're in, and the Zimbabwe that we're coming from. So I think those are kind of my greater lessons. And then the last one, obviously, is I'm the youngest in our team, actually, in our production team, as well as in the board that we have. And one of the things that I've learned is that no one, sit and think Mantate doesn't have an opinion that we can kind of take, I can come today and say, let's do a show on this particular issue. Let's do a show focused on the arts, on young people, whatever. And the team will actually take it up, because at the end of the day, I know my experience with young people. I know what kind of, show would appeal to a certain community. When someone else comes in and says, let's do a show on Zambia, people take it up. So for me, it's been that lesson to say, I don't have to be a certain age, right, to define the Africa I want. So that's kind of been the space with the Resistance Bureau.
Wow, this is excellent. It's like all hands on deck. Whatever talent that you have, whatever passion that you have, especially speaking to the younger generation, we all have a stake. We all have a role to play in making Africa better. I always say that it is our responsibility as Africans, especially as the younger generation, to turn Africa into a first world continent. There is absolutely no excuse for mediocrity. There is no excuse for failure. Yes, we've gone through some things, but the other continents, the other countries that are prospering today, they have also gone through some hell, right? So we really have no excuse to stay at this level. We need to move ahead. And I think what you are doing is really inspiring and encouraging to the younger generation that we all have to do something. Let me ask you this though. Is there any backlash to the work that you are doing? Because obviously what you're doing in Zimbabwe right now, there are some tensions obviously, and you are outspoken, you are fighting for democracy, for freedom, for rights and things like that. How is it going for you? Because I know that you cannot do that in many places, but in Zimbabwe, how is the situation going for you?
I mean, there's always backlash. It's almost like the kind of career that we choose, the kind of space I'm in. It's almost like a death sentence. You know, you choose to put your life on the line because of the work that we're doing. But before I even comment on what's happening in them, there's one comment that came. I remember we did a session on the Resistance Bureau on the benevolent dictator. There was so much resistance. You know, like I remember someone on Twitter actually said something like, all of those people in the panel need to be banned, you know? And for me, it was that whole thing of you find people liking that tweet, you find people commenting in affirmation, and you realize how messed up these are people that are having a conversation about a continent that works for everybody. But someone tells you that now you need to, you know, flame those people. But anyway, this was just one of those things. And then in Zimbabwe as well, I mean, if you look at the history in our country, a lot of people that have had a voice have been silenced in different ways. You know, we talk about people that have disappeared, you know,
right,
with no trace to this day, people that disappeared basically because they spoke and they disappeared. And then we also, especially as a young woman, I think there's a dynamic that comes to not just having a voice, but the fact that I'm a woman. I remember that last year we had 3 young women from the MDC Alliance that went missing for a couple of days. And I remember that when they were found, the state that they were in and the stories they were telling of how they were sexually violated, the way that they were, it messed me up because it's an example of what the system can do to women like me. You get it? Right. So it's almost like as a woman, there's a fear of physical assault because of your voice. Outside just being the fact that you're an activist, you've got a voice. A lot of young people, there's a guy right now who's called Makomborero. He's in prison because you stood up. You know, it's the basic thing in this country where you ask for the things that dignify you as a young person and you get arrested for it. But we've got looters that are walking scot-free, like people that have looted millions of dollars in our country. They're actually free right now. So I think in Zimbabwe, just like in a lot of African countries and potentially in other parts of the world, there is a tendency to teach those that have a voice or people like me that are not necessarily a bigger threat to the government right now. So they do those little things that will teach you a lesson from a distance, because you look at those other women and say, if it's them today, it might be me tomorrow. But I think one thing that keeps me believing in what I do is because God gave me a gift. You know, when God gives you the ability to speak, you have a responsibility to use that gift. You said something earlier about, you know, you feel like I shine a light. That's just me. I believe that we are born to make manifest the glory of God in us. And so for me, my gift allows me to manifest God's glory through just my voice. So I'm just like, this is what I'm going to give the world. If it comes with the consequence, I mean, that's just where we are. But we work every day trying to make sure we, you know, share correct information, because that's the other thing. When you say the wrong thing, you can get into trouble for it. So trying to always make sure that whatever you speak online is actually factual, is actually a representation of people's experience. So when you get into trouble, you're not getting into trouble because you're pushing fake news, but right, you're pushing the reality of people's experiences. Yeah.
As you were speaking, my mind was just racing through the different situations where people lost their lives or got persecuted because they dared speak against corruption, against evil, against, let's say, police brutality. I was just thinking about Steve Biko in South Africa, what he went through. I just thought about Ken Saro-Wiwa in Nigeria, what he went through. And sadly enough, these things, they still carry on today. Literally, every oppressive government in Africa has prisoners in the dungeon, prisoners of conscience, because they refuse to go with the flow. And there's a lot of fear, right? Because when the government strikes, just like you said, they are sending a message. They are saying, hey, if we can get him, who are you? So it's like ruling by fear. And so let me ask you a question then. Do you see hope? do you believe that there is a time when we will be able to enjoy the kind of freedoms and liberty that the first world countries have achieved? Because usually you will see that socioeconomic development always goes hand in hand with freedom, with accountability, with people being able to experiment different things without fearing that the government is going to step in, or that there is going to be this corruption, or that there's going to be war here, or that there's going to be unrest here. Do you think that we are going to get to that place where we can have this peace and prosperity?
Two reactions to that. Definitely a yes. I think if we continue doing what we're doing, if we continue playing our role, definitely we will get to an Africa where we can be proud as well, you know. The reason why I say two responses is because the first thing I believe is that, you know, for us to be where we are today, where I'm able to sit down as a woman and have this kind of conversation, if I'm able as a woman to sit in spaces where traditionally it was a masculine space, it was a patriarchal society. It means that there's certain things that were done by women and men too, you know, before us, that paved way for this. There are people that died for what we actually enjoy today. The basic rights that we have access to today, someone laid down their lives for this, right? And then you look at our liberation as a continent as well, you know, the whole slavery, you look at colonization. For us to talk of a sovereign Zimbabwe 40 years later, it's because people put their lives on the line. People spoke up, people rose in numbers and demanded something better. We might not be in a Zimbabwe that works today, but we're in a Zimbabwe that's liberated from our colonizers. That's the first thing. So it shows you the whole concept of possibility when people decide to rise in their numbers. So I believe that in the same spirit that people rose against oppression when we were colonized by the British, in the same spirit, people have the ability, capacity to actually rise against the oppression that is there today and demand better. So I do believe that there is a possibility of something better if we keep on playing our role. Then the second thing for me was, there is a law that I like to reference called the Memphis Law. And it talks about how when things are left as they are, they tend to get worse. So I always tell my friends that I don't have to do that which stops oppression entirely because I don't have the superpower to ensure that. But what I do is that I'm contributing to the, you know, to the resistance that people are putting to things getting worse. So if this guy is saying that if things are left as they are, they get worse, what it means is that when we allow the government of Zimbabwe to continue oppressing people and leave things as they are without speaking against this government, without calling it out, it means that we're giving the government the power to continue oppressing people. The moment we continue to allow the system to remain as it is because we're scared to speak up, we're scared to get on the streets and things like that, things naturally get worse. So what we do is that when we decide to resist this, when we decide to put some form of effort against this, what we're simply doing is we're stopping things from getting worse. So what it means is that Mantate might be doing something small, but if there's 1 million Mandates in Zimbabwe today, if there's 1 million Mandates on the continent, we're all putting so much pressure that it's not just stopping things from getting worse, but it is the ability to overturn things so that they turn for good. So I might be an idealist in a way, but that's just me. I believe that if I'm able to identify my role and every other young person in the continent is empowered to identify their role as well, we have the potential to, you know, to fight and bring about in Africa that brings dignity to its people.
Awesome. So one thing that concerns me a lot is the radicalization of the youth. We must, as a young generation, we must think for ourselves. We must look far. We must learn from history. We must see what others have achieved, and then try to walk in that path to achieve great results. But sometimes what I see the youth leaning back to the tribalistic mindset of the past, and then you have the youth who are not using critical thinking. They look at you and they say, oh, if you are speaking out against this, that means you are for this, so that means you are my enemy. If you are not supporting my political party, that means you are my enemy. So it's like a battle of allegiances rather than a battle of ideas. And then you have really people who are just prisoners of their fathers and forefathers' heritage, which brought us where we are in the first place. So sometimes when I look, especially when I look at social media, you just mentioned some of the things that you experience on social media. I can be hopeless sometimes. So what's your take on the youth today? Is because you are a youth and you work with the youth. What do you see when you work with them, especially maybe in your country or maybe abroad?
Yeah, so like what you're mentioning, especially the issue of tribalism, it's actually a big thing in our country. In Zimbabwe, the Shona, there's so many. In Zimbabwe, we officially recognize 16 languages in our country. So normally the languages are attached to a tribal group, and the dominant ones are Ndebele and Shona. Shona being the majority in terms of numbers, and then the Ndebele being the second largest. So the Ndebele also is attached to a history of genocide. We had Kukuraundi just after independence. This is a genocide that has never been accounted for. So there's that as well. So because of what happened, it destroyed people in a lot of ways. And it didn't just destroy people physically, emotionally, and mentally, but it destroyed infrastructure. A lot of communities have never recovered from that. So it's almost like when other places are starting from zero, you're all are starting from -5. It's like you're having to catch up first, but you're not going to catch up because the state has not recognized where you're coming from and its role in the history that you experience as a people. So for a long time, there's always been that animosity of the Ndebele and the Shona. I remember there was a time, I think it was 2018 January, I was in a function for young people in the capital city, and someone was saying that the Ndebeles are so petty, the genocide happened long back, they're trying to, I don't know, blow things out of proportion. And I'm like, this is a young person that has zero idea of the emotional and the mental pain that someone goes through every day when they think about what happened to their families. This is a young person that has zero idea of what it means to be a child of a victim of that genocide, and so there's always this inferiority, superiority. It comes out even on Twitter, there's hashtag Ndebele Twitter, there's the Shona people telling the Ndebele this, there's the Ndebele people telling the Shona people this. So there's that thing that divides us. It allows the system that is there now to thrive, because it means that they will actually take advantage of these differences among young people to actually separate us. When we're separated, we can't really agree on things. And it's not just the tribalism here as well. There's a whole lot of things, it's political polarization. That's one of the biggest challenges we have in the country, where you cannot have an opinion without being given a political party. As Mantate, if today I started questioning the leader of the opposition party, Nelson Chamisa, people are quick to say, oh, you're ZANU-PF. And I'm just like, oh, so yesterday ZANU-PF was calling me MDC, that kind of situation. Right. So there's this polarization that makes people feel like you've got to belong somewhere for giving that opinion, and I've got to hate you because you're coming from. And for me, it's always a question of, what are we outside our tribe? What are we outside the political affiliations that we have? What are we outside our gender as young people? So if we're not, as young people, able to come to a space where we recognize that we are young people before all these other things, and we have had a future taken away from us by selfish people that are so entitled because they gave liberation to this country, I feel like we won't go anywhere. So we need to, it's not even just an issue in Zimbabwe, it's actually in the continent as well. You have South Africans fighting Zimbabweans in South Africa. You've got people, right now there's so much going on in Mozambique. So there's just so much happening in the continent. And it's because we are different. So it's like our difference has been the source of conflict for the longest time. And young people don't realize that because we have the energy, we're consistently used as fronts to this, perpetuation of conflict. If you find people during elections that are violating other people, destroying property, beating up people, it's young people that have been used to do that. So I think as young people, we need to come to a place where we strip ourselves of political affiliations. We strip ourselves of where we come from in terms of our tribe. We strip ourselves in terms of our class economically and say, what kind of a person am I? What is my contribution to the problems in this country? What is my contribution to the solutions that can help dignify other people? So I think that's where the issue is. And the last thing I want to mention on that is the fact that these children of the current regime, or like the current crop of selfish leaders, corrupt individuals that are adopting the culture of their fathers. So for sure, I always tell people that the Emerson Mnangagwa, the president right now, may not be president tomorrow, but there is a young person that is being groomed that in 20 years' time is going to be as evil as that man, if allowed to be. So it's almost like the young people that are there, that are products of these men that are so evil, are being taught the very same selfishness that is a problem today. So that's what my fear is. I think the solution to all of this, from where I stand, is a revisit of Ubuntu. To say, as a human being, independent of the privileges I have, who am I and how do I treat the next person? But if we're not there, where we look at the other person as a human being and take responsibility of respecting their space, respecting their lives, and ensuring that my choices don't take away the dignity of the other person, I feel like we won't go far as a continent.
Yeah, that's really one pathology that we need to get cured of, knowing that my dignity and your dignity should remain unviolated, should remain sacred, regardless of what I believe politically, regardless of what happens to be your political affiliation. Coming back to this issue of Ndebele and Shona in your country, I'm originally from Rwanda, that's where I was born.
Really?
Yes. So we've had issues with Hutus and Tutsis. So there seems to be this sentiment of not accepting or rejecting the suffering of the other, because you fear that the suffering, or you fear that validating the suffering of the other invalidates your own suffering. So you choose to hold on to your own suffering as a sacred thing, and the other person chooses to hold on to the suffering of their people as a sacred thing. And because of that, because of the past, the things that happened in the past, we cannot go beyond that. It's like, okay, we can be friends as long as you recognize that I've suffered, but I'm not going to recognize your suffering. You bow down to my political agenda, then we can be friends. And I always fault the older generations that have not learned to mend their differences, that have not been able to teach us from experience how to move forward, how to be reconciled. And so the genocide that happened in your country some decades ago, even right now, it still carries weight, because there are people who are feeling humiliated because they are not recognized, because their story, their pain, their family struggle is ignored. And when you ignore somebody's history, when you ignore somebody's past, it's like you are ignoring that person altogether. You are ignoring what that person stands for, which calls for us, the younger generation. I sometimes think that we need to be kind of rebels sometimes. We need to rebel against these old pathologies. We need to rebel against these old mentalities and hold each other hand in hand. So it will be nice to see young Ndebeles and young Shonas come together and say, I recognize your pain. I embrace you as my brother. Say that to each other. I embrace you as my sister. and then come together and say, together, we are going to forge forward a new Zimbabwe, a new Africa, a new reality. I really think as the young people, we have a lot of work to do. So let me
We
ask
do.
you, a little bit about the Magamba Network, where you are working on empowering young people in digital creative areas. So can you speak a little bit about that again?
Yeah, so I joined Magamba last year in July as program lead for a program called Arts for Change. But as a way potentially of just giving an overview of Magamba. So Magamba is a youth-led, youth-focused organization that seeks to use creative forms of activism to open up the democratic space in Zimbabwe. So we do a lot of things. We work with musicians, we work with filmmakers, we work with comedians, different young people, that are trying to use their talent, their art to speak truth to power. So what we try to do is to convene youth voices, in around areas of governance and democracy, and also just being able to work with young people to create information in a way that makes sense to young people. Because, us young people don't want to show up in town hall meetings, where our councillor is standing there, and we don't like this traditional way of information dissemination. So what we do is to try to package information in a way that makes sense for young people, and also to use arts, like use comedy, satire, and things like that. Give a lighter tone to hardcore issues and get more young people engaging. So that's basically kind of what we do. And then the program that I'm leading was launched also last year. So with Arts for Change, what we're doing is we're saying, how do we bring the unconventional voices to discourse around accountability and social justice in Zimbabwe? Because a lot of our young people are talented, but a lot of them don't want to get involved in political dialogue, because in Africa, you get into trouble for giving a political opinion as an artist. It kind of affects your sales and stuff in terms of your music. So what we're trying to do is, how do we begin to work with socially conscious young people in Zimbabwe and help them to create content or music that can actually, speak truth to power? We also work with filmmakers. So one of the projects that we have under Arts for Change is called Voice to Rap, which is short for Voice to Represent. We also have a similar program in Nigeria and Liberia, but they're done differently, but it's the same concept basically. So what we do with the Voice to Rep is every year we identify 10 young people that we recruit into a mentorship program, a year-long mentorship program. And these are young, socially conscious musicians. Some of them have never recorded a professional song. Some of them basically know they love singing, but they've never known how to best tailor their message, So what we do is we provide them mentorship and also provide them training around civic engagement to say, how do you interact with communities? How do you interact with issues in your community? And how do you then package it in your music to tell stories that matter, to amplify issues and stuff like that? And the second project is called Film Fellowship. So with Film Fellowship, again, we work with 10 young people every year. And the Film Fellowship centers around documenting films and short documentaries around issues in the community. And we're actually working on a couple of films now that are going to be screened from August this year. And you find that some of the films talk about genital mutilation in Zimbabwe. Other people talk about different things. Someone did a dance film, trying to show gender-based violence, the power dynamics involved in rape cases using dance. So it's being a part of this creative space where no one can put a limit to creativity. So these young people are just going all out in their creativity, but they're telling stories that matter. And when you take back these stories to the communities, people get to see what's happening. They start being honestly conversant around those things. People start to discuss, they start asking themselves, what are the causes? Who is responsible? Who do we talk to? How do we begin to address this? So for us, that's what we're trying to do. Create content that educates people about the issues in their community, but also encourage dialogue that leads people to action. So that's basically what I'm doing at Magamba.
That's awesome. And so let's talk a little bit again about your your online store that you are founder and CEO of. So you do branding and consultancy. So what do you mean exactly by that?
So UMotle is a Sotho term. It means you're beautiful. It's just that simple. So for me, the reason why I called it that was just understanding that every one of the African women are beautiful in their own way. Like, you're beautiful not just in the way that you look, but you're beautiful in the strength with which you rose above your struggle. You're beautiful for the resilience that you put despite the history of women in the continent. I'm looking at women that are beautiful for the boldness that they have to step up and take up leadership spaces within politics, corporate spaces, in the arts industry. So for me, it's celebrating and affirming women's beauty, and being able to curate the experiences of women that make them beautiful. So what we did when we launched the brand is that we launched a series of earrings that were profiling women in Zimbabwe that we knew. So it was women with different stories. Some are cancer survivors that are also talking about abusive marriages that they stepped out of. So when you're profiling this kind of woman, you're allowing her to tell a story of resilience. You're allowing her to interact with other women and educate them. We also had a young woman that actually had earrings done with her face, and she has this amazing afro. I've known that girl since 2014, and she's always had an afro. So for me, it was talking about African women's hair. Sometimes we're made to think that our hair is not good enough, like your afro is too kinky or this. But for me, it's about helping women find what's beautiful about them, especially things that link them to the fact that they're African. So in the long term, what we're trying to do is to not just focus on Zimbabwean women, South African women, or women in Southern Africa. I want to explore the continent, go to Rwanda, and actually interact with women that can talk about the genocide, but in the sense of, fashion, expressing their history through fashion. You go to Ethiopia and look at the conflict that's there. For me, that's just what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to tell stories. And then the brand and consultancy element that we mentioned in the page also has to do with the way that women dress. Sometimes as women growing in this space, especially in political spaces, we are told to dress a certain way.
Right.
So it's almost like the way we dress we are defined by what we're wearing. But for me, I'm like, let's own that narrative that we're defined by what we're wearing and not allow someone else to tell us how we need to dress. So we want to give opportunity to women to say, if you're in politics and you don't want to, wear certain things because that's the standard, how do we begin to incorporate our African print, the fabric that we have, the colors and the stories that we can tell through the way that if you're president as a woman, if you're a minister, imagine that minister that dresses a statement kind of dressing that allows people to ask questions. Why does she dress that way? What's the story behind that? So for me, that's what I'm trying to do. It's more than just business, because it's business at the end of the day, but the bigger picture being allowing women to tell their stories through the way that they're dressing.
As an innovator, as a pioneer, one thing with innovators and pioneers, you are always on the go trying to do something, but at the same time you are making mistakes, because a lot of times you're doing things that nobody's has coached you. So you learn as you go, you make mistakes, you rectify them, you keep moving and so forth. So what would you think are some of the mistakes that you have committed, that you've learned from, that if you had to do things over again, maybe you wouldn't do those same things?
I think my biggest lesson has been the balance. Balance is one thing that's key, because I think for us, especially young people that are starting out in the continent, is that we don't have resources to kickstart our businesses. So we've got to have an 8-to-5 job. When I launched UMotle, when I started my business, like all of the businesses that I've been doing have been a side hustle, because I have an 8-to-5 job that needs me to focus. And then I've also been doing my degree. So what's been happening, there was a time when I went to work at 8, finished work at 5. My classes were starting at 5 and ending at 8, Monday to Friday. Half the day on Saturday, I was at school. So you discover that I'm spending so much time on the go, but on the side, I need to be making money that allows me to raise capital for my bigger ventures. So I think one of the lessons that I learned was, number one, that I need to find some form of balance. And it's not balance in the way of what am I doing at different. It's about mental balance, it's about emotional balance, being at the right place, because when I'm emotionally or mentally disturbed at any point, I can't function properly in my job. I can't innovate in my business. So for me, I very much invest in my emotional and mental sanity, because that's where it all starts. And then the second thing also is, when you pull in all resources and hope that things will come back to you, the thing is, things don't always come back straight away. The work that we're doing, the businesses we're trying to push, the returns are in the long term. And sometimes young people don't have the resources to spare, like we don't have money that we can put aside and hope in 12 months it's going to give me returns. That money is needed for something else. So I think for me, there's some moments where I've jumped into things without thinking, oh, okay, what does it mean for the next 3 months? I don't have money to do this ABC, things like that. So I'm learning so much to think a lot around the financial implications of my new ventures, to say, what does it mean for me? Because I can't invest in this and other areas of my life actually suffer. So finding a way of financially balancing my interests. And the other thing also is on the capital that we need for our businesses. I can tell you for sure that in Zimbabwe, people have ideas, banks don't give so much loans, to young people that don't have the collateral to promise, to guarantee that they'll pay back. So a lot of young people don't have access to capital to start businesses. The government doesn't offer so much as well. So you discover that it's young people that have jobs that can afford to save. And it's not easy to save, trust me, in this country right now, to say it takes a lot to spare that like $2,000, $3,000, whatever amount you put in your business, because it means you're giving all that you have. I have peers that are driving nice cars. You have friends that are doing things that you're thinking, oh, at this age, or because of the work that I've been doing over the years, I could have saved enough to do that. But then you also look at the long-term return. So for me, I'm always there saying that I want to see in the next 3 years being able to do this, but also continue my business. So it's not just me having a car and sacrificing my businesses, but it's me investing right now in my businesses. And the next 2 years, I'm able to get the kind of car I want or whatever. But it's like thinking, what priorities do I put in place? So it's things we're never taught, especially because we're first generation in our families. I'm the first one to go to university in my family. I'm the first one to also, like right now, I'm the first one and also one of the youngest to run my own side businesses type thing. I'm the first one to have the job that I have right now. So it's like you're first generation in a lot of things, and you're trying to keep up with the black text. You're trying to keep up with things that you were never taught, but you're having to deal with now. So it's also something that has taught me that it's okay to open up and learn from other people, because I'm not the only young person trying to make it work in Zimbabwe. I have friends that are doing business in agriculture, business in accounting, whatever, different spaces, but it's always coming together and building networks of young people so that we share lessons. Because when we're sharing lessons, it means that the mistakes that someone else made, I don't get to make, because I've already learned from that place and I'm able to mitigate. So I think for me, those are kind of some of the lessons that I've learned. And I can tell you for sure that even now, especially the issue of balance, I'm learning to decentralize, like delegate my work, find people that can do the work. When I started UMotle, I knew for sure that it was going to be very demanding in terms of marketing. So I actually set aside resources that were dedicated purely to marketing the brand when it was launching, because I knew the value of getting it out there. So I could have easily said, I'm going to run the social media accounts, but I have a job that needs me to be working, not posting on social media about business and stuff like that. So just being able to balance, and find people, and knowing that, okay, it's peanuts I'm getting at the beginning, but I can spread those peanuts so that the work doesn't feel heavy on me. So yeah, I think those are the lessons that I've learned.
Yeah, you were just talking about saving. Saving is actually hard. It doesn't matter where you live, how much money you make. Saving requires a lot of discipline. And when you have a vision, a lot of time you have to make a decision that you are going to run the course alone, because sometimes people say that leadership is a lonely place. Sometimes you have this vision, you have this thing that you want to do, and as you are running that course, you look left and right, you see people doing different things, you see people living or pretending like they are living large, and you can say, wow, how about me? But you just keep following the path, keep hearing the voice and just keep going. And because that's your journey, that's your road, that's your race. It's not anybody's else race. So last question that I would like to ask you is, what is ahead? I mean, I see you right now, you're doing a lot of things in, empowering the youth. You are talking with politicians and activists and trying to change Africa, make Africa better. I mean, you are really doing a lot of things at such a young age. And I can only see that ahead of you, there are so many great things. And I would actually encourage you to inspire as many as possible, to reproduce as many Mantatas as possible, because Africa needs you. Africa needs people who are working like you, who are doing things like you, so that we can move our continent forward. So what's next for you? What do you see ahead of you?
A lot. The future is definitely bright, and I'm just opening myself to possibilities, because I've seen that in a lot of instances, what I plan is not necessarily what comes. God has a way of serving me bigger than I actually pray for. But the one thing that's solid in my career is my academic. I'm continuing on an academic course. I'm doing psychology right now, wrapping up my first degree. I want to jump straight into my master's next year and do my PhD afterwards. One of my personal vision as a young woman is to role model female leadership in Africa. I want to role model that educated African woman that's contributing to the narrative through research. So that's what I want to do. I want the PhD. So I'm hoping that by 30, 31, I'm actually on course, and also writing more books. I published a book early this year with a couple of women. It's an anthology of short stories by Zimbabwean women, and we're just sharing, different experiences of African women. So I want to continue, because I'm a writer. I love writing. So I want to continue, documenting my thoughts, documenting my perspectives, and also just documenting experiences around me, because that's how we learned about what happened in the past. People were writing their stories. So that's what's going to happen. And then professionally, of course, we want to keep growing. I'm not going to be an employee for long. I hope my boss doesn't hear this. In the long term, I want to, for me, I'm built to, I don't know, it's, when you're in leadership, right, you can't contain me for too long. Like, that's just how leaders are. Like, we thrive in places where we're groomed. It's great. Where I am now, I'm in a very great space for mentorship. I'm being mentored by great people. I'm being groomed by great leaders. But I think in their hearts, they know that we don't have her forever. So I'm very cognizant of that. And I'm saying that I want to keep opening myself for bigger opportunities where I'm able to take up space to lead. And in my country as well, the long-term plan is obviously to lead within the country as well. I really, really want to take up space in Zimbabwe's political leadership as I'm growing. I'm still kind of finding myself in that space, but I really want to take up space politically in the continent as well, because, it's not just about Zimbabwe. I think my calling, my heart is Africa. So for me, I don't want to be the example in the continent, like in Zimbabwe. I want to be an example in the continent. I want young people in Rwanda, young people in Kenya to know Mantate, and not just know me and admire me, but be role modeled to find themselves. Like what you're saying, that I don't think that Mantate alone can change Zimbabwe. I don't think that Mantate alone can change the continent. I don't have that capacity. But I believe that if we have more people being, driven, being empowered to find themselves, we will be able to have more Mandates in there. It doesn't have to be exactly me, right? But people finding themselves and pursuing that. So I can't really put words to where I'm going, but I know for sure that the future is very bright and I'm ready for it.
Oh, that's so excellent. Your hope for the future is so contagious. A lot of people, we are cheering for you, and we are behind you. Like I said at the beginning, you are like a shining star. A shining star, or like how they say you can't hide the lamp under the bushel, under the bed. Put it out there. Let people see. Let people see what's possible, and be inspired. So thank you very much. It has been
No,
a
thank
pleasure.
you for
Yeah.
having me.